Welcome to my Bard story.
And welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're going to unpack a really profound and often challenging passage from Genesis 21, verses 9 through 21.
That's right. The story focusing on Hagar and Ishmael being sent away. It's packed with theological weight, ancient cultural context, and just, well, deeply human drama.
Absolutely. Our mission today is to explore these layers, really pull out some vital insights for you, our listeners, especially those of you serving in ministry.
We'll be looking into God's sovereign plan, his sometimes complex dealings with humanity,
And the surprising ways he shows his care, even in the middle of these incredibly difficult separations. It's a narrative that, honestly, it compels us to grapple with divine justice, profound human pain, and the mysterious unfolding of God's covenant promises.
and hopefully we'll uncover lessons that really resonate with our own lives and ministries today. Scripture reading and initial observations, Genesis 21.9, 10 to 21, NLT. Okay, let's turn to our study note then. We'll start with Genesis 21, verse 9, from the New Living Translation. But Sarah saw Ishmael, the son of Abraham, and her Egyptian servant Hagar, making fun of her son Isaac.
Right from the very first verse, we hit a crucial detail. Ishmael making fun of or mocking Isaac. Now, the Hebrew word here, emak, it's genuinely fascinating because it shares the exact same root as Isaac's name, yak.
Which means he laughs or laughter.
Precisely. So you immediately get this almost bitter irony, right? Isaac is the child of God's laughter-inducing promise, but Ishmael's laughter here is seen as mocking, possibly even hostile.
Yeah, it sets a very tense tone right from the start. So it's clearly more than just, kids playing around, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sarah immediately reads this as something deeply hostile, contemptuous even. What does that tell us about the underlying tension? Not just between the boys, but maybe the whole atmosphere in Abraham's household at this point.
You're absolutely right to pick up on that tension. While manna can mean innocent play elsewhere in the Old Testament.
Okay.
In this specific, highly charged family environment, with the long-awaited covenant heir finally on the scene, Sarah's extreme reaction, it speaks volumes.
She didn't see it as just a joke.
Not at all. For her, it felt like a direct challenge to Isaac's rightful status. It wasn't just a childhood squabble. It signified a much deeper conflict brewing.
And this isn't just Sarah's interpretation, is it? It feels like later biblical writers saw it that way too.
That's a key point. It's really significant that the Apostle Paul himself, centuries later, in Galatians 4.29, he interprets this exact act as persecution. He uses the Greek word disko.
Persecution. Wow, that's strong language.
It is. And this New Testament theological lens, it elevates Ishmael's actions far beyond a simple sibling spat. It gives it a definitive negative, an adversarial meaning.
So it really underlines Sarah's protective instinct for Isaac. She saw Ishmael's mocking as a genuine spiritual threat.
Exactly, a threat to Isaac's legitimate and unique status as the child of promise, the one through whom God's covenant would continue. And, commentators like Gordon Wenham suggest Ishmael probably a teenager then.
Right, not a little kid.
No, he was likely engaging in a form of bullying, maybe a power play, to assert his position as the older son, testing the waters about Isaac's inheritance.
And John Walton, I think our notes mentioned, he suggests this might have happened during Isaac's weaning feast.
Yes, exactly, which would have been a very public occasion meant to formally acknowledge Isaac as the legitimate heir.
So in that setting, any disrespect from Ishmael would be magnified.
Hugely amplified, seen as a direct public challenge to the whole family structure and ultimately to God's unfolding promise.
Okay, moving on to verse 10. This shows Sarah's immediate and, well, very strong reaction. So she demanded of Abraham, "Get rid of that slave and her son. He is not going to share the inheritance with my son Isaac. I won't have it."
Her demand is incredibly blunt, uncompromising, absolute. Cast out or get rid of.
That Hebrew verb, gario, you said it's strong.
Very strong. It's not just about sending someone away for a bit. It signifies a permanent legal expulsion. Explicitly designed to strip Ishmael of any inheritance rights he might have had. It's about severing all legal and familial ties.
And her language, my son Isaac, versus that slave and her son, it really draws a line.
A stark contrast emphasizing the unbridgeable divide she wanted to create right then and there.
It sounds incredibly harsh, though, especially considering Hagar and Ishmael had been family for so long, and Hagar bore Abraham as her son. Was this kind of thing normal in ancient Near Eastern law, or was Sarah really pushing the boundaries here?
That's an excellent question, and it is complex. Sarah's demand definitely pushes the limits. As scholars like Nahum Sarna point out, ancient Near Eastern laws, things like the Nuzi tablets, the Code of Hammurabi.
Right. The major legal codes back then.
Exactly. They did offer some protection to slave women and their children. Sometimes a son born to a slave woman could even inherit, especially if the main wife was childless.
But that wasn't the situation here anymore.
Precisely. The situation got much more complicated, legally tricky once the primary wife bore a legitimate son. So Sarah's demand, while definitely emotionally charged, was also a very strategic, legally motivated move.
To ensure Isaac's unique status, no question about who the heir was.
Exactly. Solidifying Isaac's position as the sole heir within that specific legal and social framework.
So it's about the future, the covenant line, ensuring clarity.
Absolutely. Victor Hamilton, in his commentary, he really highlights the intensity of that verb guria. He reminds us it's the same verb used elsewhere for God driving out Israel's enemies from the Promised Land.
Wow.
Or for Adam and Eve being driven out of Eden.
Okay, that really emphasizes the seriousness, the finality.
It does. It underscores that this was meant to ensure the covenant inheritance passed solely, unequivocally, through Isaac. Klaus Westermann frames it as a necessary theological separation, actually. Crucial for clarifying God's promise.
Okay, let's look at verses 11 and 12 now. Abraham's response and then God stepping in. This upset Abraham very much because Ishmael was his son. But God told Abraham, "Do not be upset about the boy and your servant. Do whatever Sarah tells you, for Isaac is the son through whom your descendants will be counted."
Abraham's reaction, it's described as very displeasing, very distressed. The Hebrew literally says evil in his eyes.
That's powerful phrasing.
It really conveys his deep fatherly love for Ishmael, his son, and the immense internal conflict he was facing, just torn between his affection for his son and his wife's insistent demand, an agonizing dilemma.
And this really gives me pause. God telling Abraham to listen to Sarah, even when her demand feels so drastic, so harsh, frankly.
Yeah.
How do we make sense of God seemingly siding with what looked like a very human, maybe even flawed decision by Sarah?
You've hit on one of the most surprising and I think profound elements of this whole passage. Gerhard von Rad really emphasizes this remarkable fact. God fully aligns himself with Sarah's demand.
Even with her mixed motives, jealousy, fear.
Yes. Regardless of her motives, which were undoubtedly tangled with human feelings, her request, objectively, aligned with God's larger redemptive plan. It teaches us something challenging but vital. God's will can work through imperfect human vessels. And even through situations filled with human sin and relational pain, his purposes can transcend our immediate grasp of fairness.
So God's choosing isn't based on human merit or birth order or what we think is fair.
Exactly. Bruce Waltke sees this as a pivotal text for understanding the doctrine of election in the Bible. God's choice is based purely on his sovereign grace, not on human factors.
And Paul picks up on this.
He does. Directly cites it in Romans 9.7, using this very passage to explain God's sovereign choice within Israel. Not all who are descended from Israel are Israel. And John Sailhammer suggests Abraham's distress might also include some remorse for his past actions, maybe taking Hagar in the first place, which created this mess.
Ah, that adds another layer.
So God's intervention here isn't just instruction, it's also comfort for Abraham, assuring him God's plan is firm, even in this family agony. God's command actually clarified the path forward for Abraham, making obedience the highest good in that moment.
Let's read verses 13 and 14. God continues speaking about Ishmael, and then Abraham acts. "But I will also make a nation of the descendants of Hagar's son, because he is your son too." So Abraham got up early the next morning, prepared food and a container of water, and strapped them on Hagar's shoulders. Then he sent her away with their son, and she wandered aimlessly in the wilderness of Beersheba.
So right here, God reaffirms his promise to Ishmael, the one he first gave back in Genesis 17.
To make him a great nation.
Yes, because he is also Abraham's offspring. God acknowledges that bond. This is a profound display of God's faithfulness and compassion. He doesn't just abandon Ishmael because he's not the chosen heir.
God's mercy extends beyond the main line.
It does, and Abraham acts immediately, getting up early the next morning. That echoes his later obedience, doesn't it, when called to sacrifice Isaac?
It really shows his reverence for God's command, even when painful. But the provision, just bread and a skin of water, it feels so minimal, almost inadequate for a wilderness journey.
Yes, it's a stark, almost heartbreaking image. And it highlights a critical transition. Kenneth Matthews sees this limited provision as symbolic. Abraham's direct paternal responsibility is ending.
He gave what he could, the basics.
Right, the basic necessities for a journey. But from that point on, Hagar and Ishmael's survival depends entirely on God's provision. It's Abraham's final human act, signaling the shift to divine oversight.
And just to clarify, it was probably the provisions on Hagar's shoulder, not the boy, since Ishmael was older.
Yes, Nahum Sarna clarifies that. Ishmael would have been around 16, a young man, so it's most likely the supplies on her shoulder. And then she wandered aimlessly in the wilderness of Beersheba.
The wilderness. Gordon Wenham reminds us that's often a place of testing, danger, but also a divine encounter in the Bible.
Exactly. And Beersheba, right at the southern edge of Canaan, it's like a gateway to this unknown, dangerous territory, symbolizing their departure from the promised protection, plunging them into, well, a state of lostness.
Okay, moving on to verses 15 and 16. This is where we see Hagar's absolute despair, a truly agonizing scene. When the water was gone, Hagar left the boy in the shade of a bush. Then she went and sat down by herself about a bow shot away. "I don't want to watch the boy die," she said as she burst into tears.
This is the absolute low point, the climax of their human struggle. Water running out in the wilderness is quite simply a death sentence.
Yeah.
And Hagar leaving Ishmael under a bush, it's not cruel abandonment, it's utter helplessness, profound maternal grief. She just cannot bear to watch her son die.
It's the end of her resources, physically and emotionally, her breaking point.
Completely. And she sits about a bow shot away. That specific detail. Why is that distance so significant? What's it telling us?
It seems so precise.
It is. John Walton notes that a bow shot kimeosquet in Hebrew is this vivid, ancient unit of distance, maybe 100, 200 yards.
Okay.
It highlights the narrator's skill and Hagar's desperate state. It's close enough to still feel his presence, be aware of his suffering, but far enough to spare her the unbearable agony of watching his final moments, a mix of pain and self-preservation.
And it also hints at Ishmael's future, doesn't it? As an archer.
A subtle foreshadowing, yes, connecting his present helplessness to his future strength. Claus Westerman really commends the narrator here, conveying such deep sorrow with so few words, leaving, sitting down, weeping.
A powerful moment of human tragedy, setting the stage for God to step in.
Exactly. And it's a sharp contrast to her first escape in Genesis 16, where she fled from abuse. Here, she's cast out, innocent, facing death.
All right, now verses 17 and 18. Divine intervention arrives, marking that profound turning point. But God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven, "Hagar, what's wrong? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Go to him and comfort him, for I will make a great nation from his descendants."
This is it, the turning point right at the bottom of despair. And crucially, the text says, God heard the boy crying.
Even though Hagar was the one weeping loudly.
Right. And this directly echoes Ishmael's name, Ishmael. God hears. God's listening here is deeply rooted in his commitment to Abraham's offspring. It focuses on the child himself, upholding that earlier promise.
It's not just a response to emotion, but a fulfillment of commitment. He hears the child's cry.
Yes. And the angel calls to Hagar from heaven, brings comfort, do not be afraid. That classic phrase signifying God's presence.
Reassurance. But then there's the command, go to him and comfort him, or other translations say, lift up the boy and hold him fast. It sounds like more than just comfort, it's a call to action.
It is a powerful call to action, rooted in faith, requiring immediate obedience. Bruce Waltke really emphasizes this. God's command requires Hagar to act in faith even before her circumstances visibly change.
She has to get up and grab the child she just gave up on?
Exactly. Rise up, take hold of the child she had just cast off in despair. It shows faith isn't passive resignation, it's obedient action, a courageous response to God's word.
Even when nothing looks different yet.
Right. And then God immediately reiterates his promise, I will make him into a great nation. That provides the foundation for her renewed hope and the courage she needs to act. Nahum Sarna also stresses that God heard the boy's voice to underscore faithfulness to Ishmael as Abraham's descendant, fulfilling his promise in both lines.
Okay, finally, verses 19 through 21. God's provision and Ishmael's future. A sense of resolution. Then God opened Hagar's eyes, and she saw a well full of water. She quickly filled her water container and gave the boy a drink. And God was with the boy as he grew up in the wilderness. He became a skillful archer, and he settled in the wilderness of Paran. His mother arranged for him to marry a woman from the land of Egypt.
This is such a powerful act of salvation, and that phrase, God opened her eyes, it's absolutely key.
Why key?
Because it strongly implies the well was likely there all along, maybe a known landmark. But Hagar, just consumed by despair and panic, literally couldn't see it.
So God didn't magically create a well.
Probably not. It seems his intervention was about illuminating what was already present, providing salvation through existing resources that were hidden from her sight by her fear.
That's wow. A powerful aha moment about how God often works. It's about spiritual vision as much as physical sight.
Exactly. And the narrative then summarizes Ishmael's life. God was with the boy. That's huge. He becomes an archer, settles in Paran, and his mother gets him an Egyptian wife.
It brings his story to a distinct point, separate from Isaac's path.
Right. Kenneth Matthews connects this eyes-opened idea to other biblical moments of spiritual insight, like Elisha's servant seeing the chariots of fire.
Or the disciples on the Emmaus Road.
Precisely. It speaks volumes about recognizing God's work and provision, even when things look hopeless, often just by restoring our spiritual perception.
And that phrase, God was with him.
Gordon Wenham points out how significant that is. It's a biblical blessing formula used for major figures like Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses. So even though Ishmael is outside the main covenant line through Isaac, he still gets God's personal presence, protection, blessing. God's care extends. John Walton gives us the geography for the wilderness of Paran, placing Ishmael's descendants on Israel's southern border, setting up future interactions. And the Egyptian wife. That solidifies his separate identity. Ancestor of an independent nation, culturally distinct from Abraham's family, but still under God's watchful eye. 2. Deep dive into scholar insights.
Okay, our deep dive into the scriptures always invites us to explore those rich insights from scholars, doesn't it? Unearthing those aha moments that bring the text alive in ways we might miss on first reading. It's like turning over a familiar stone and discovering this whole hidden world underneath.
That's a great way to put it, finding connections we hadn't seen before.
Exactly. So let's explore some fascinating perspectives that really illuminate this complex story of Hagar and Ishmael.
Okay, first, let's dig deeper into the nuance of Ishmael's mocking, that entho. We touched on it, but scholars add some really profound layers. For instance, some, like Kenneth Matthews, suggest Ishmael's behavior might actually mirror his mother Hagar's earlier contempt for Sarah. Remember back in Genesis 16 when Hagar became pregnant?
Yes, she despised Sarah then.
Right. So the idea is this dismissive, maybe hostile attitude could have been passed down, leading Ishmael to treat Isaac, the child of promise, with similar disdain.
Wow, that's unsettling. A tragic cycle of brokenness within the family itself.
Sure.
It makes it more than just a moment of disrespect.
It does. And remember the point about the wordplay with Isaac's name?
The Sinaiah and Yitzhak.
Victor Hamilton highlights this as a powerful theological wordplay. The narrator deliberately uses the same root. Ishmael's mocking acts like a sarcastic, defiant imitation of the laughter, Isaac, that God lovingly provided through his promise.
So Ishmael wasn't just challenging Isaac, he was, in a way, challenging God's promise itself.
That seems to be the implication, which is why Bruce Waldke, aligning with Paul in Galatians 4, sees this as a deeper spiritual conflict, the fleshly opposing the spiritual, a microcosm of the world's antagonism toward God's people.
So it's not just family drama, it's a spiritual battle playing out right there in Abraham's tent.
Precisely. And adding another layer, Nahum Sarna offers a fascinating legal angle. He suggests Ishmael might have been subtly testing his legal status after Isaac's birth.
How so?
By mocking Isaac, he was maybe probing how Abraham and Sarah would react, trying to determine the boundaries of his position, any claim he might still have.
Which explains why Sarah's reaction was so immediate and definitive, high stakes.
Absolutely. And if this happened during Isaac's weaning feast, that public ceremony establishing Isaac as the heir, it would have turned Ishmael's act into a very public challenge to God's established order for the family.
Okay, here's a truly profound insight from Victor Hamilton. This one really makes you pause and rethink the meaning of listening in a spiritual context. He draws this fascinating parallel between God commanding Abraham to listen to Sarah here in Genesis 21 and God's rebuke of Adam for listening to Eve back in Genesis 3.
Yes. This is one of those insights that just opens up the text, doesn't it? A real aha moment. It shows God's incredible redemptive power at work.
How so? Explain that connection.
Well, in Eden, Adam listening to his wife's suggestion instead of God's direct command led to the fall. It brought a curse.
Right.
Yet here, in Genesis 21, Abraham listening to his wife explicitly commanded by God himself actually serves to advance God's covenant plan.
Wow, the same verb, yuma, to hear and obey, used in both places.
Exactly. Hamilton suggests the narrator uses it intentionally to show a corrective scene. It's like God is demonstrating that under his sovereign guidance, patterns that previously led to failure can be redeemed. transformed into pathways for his will.
So it's not about blindly obeying human desires.
No, not at all. It's about recognizing that when God's clear word directs us, even actions that seem counterintuitive or maybe echo past failures can become instruments of his redemptive purpose.
That's amazing. God redeeming and redirecting human actions within his grand story.
It truly is. It shows how God works through human free will, even our flawed decisions, to achieve his perfect will. He takes our brokenness and redirects it for his glory.
Okay, another powerful insight, this one from Klaus Westermann. He looks at Hagar's loud weeping, not just as, an emotional outburst, but as something deeper, a form of lament or even litigation, a complaint directed right at God.
Yes, this perspective really elevates Hagar's act. It gives it deep theological weight. It's not just despair, it's a kind of desperate faith.
How does that work? Lament as litigation.
Well, in the ancient Near East and all through the Psalms, crying out to God was a recognized act of faith, a legitimate way to petition him. It was like filing a legal claim, demanding God remember his covenant, uphold his promises, and act justice when things seemed unjust.
So Hagar's weeping becomes this desperate, nonverbal plea to God, challenging him to be faithful.
Exactly. A challenge to demonstrate his faithfulness in her seemingly abandoned state. It's a powerful reminder for us, I think, that even our rawest cries of despair, when they're aimed towards heaven, God can see them as a form of calling on him.
A desperate yet profound act of trust in his character and power.
Right. It shows prayer doesn't always need perfect words. Sometimes it's the heart's deepest anguish that God hears most clearly, like a lawsuit against heaven demanding attention.
Now, the text says Ishmael became a skillful archer. Most people see that positively, right? Independence, strength, survival in the wilderness.
That's the common reading, yes. Signifying strength, self-sufficiency, the nomadic skills needed to thrive out there.
But Bruce Waltke offers a more nuanced view, suggesting maybe a dual implication, even something challenging.
He does. Waltke expands on it. While archer certainly means strength and self-reliance, it can also carry this latent connotation of, hostility, potential conflict.
Hostility, how so?
In the Old Testament, archers are often linked with warfare, raiding, opposition. Think of Jacob's blessing of Joseph in Genesis 49, where archers bitterly attacked him. So Waltke suggests this hints that while Ishmael's descendants would be blessed, become a great nation, their nomadic lifestyle would inherently create ongoing tension with the settled agricultural people of promise, Israel.
So his identity foreshadows becoming a powerful but potentially adversarial nation.
Yes, fulfilling that earlier prophecy in Genesis 16, his hand will be against everyone and everyone's hand against him. It's a complex blessing, positive elements of resilience, but also these challenging implications of future conflict woven right into his identity, strength intertwined with friction.
Yeah, Nahum Sarna highlights a fascinating narrative detail we might easily miss. God hears Ishmael's voice, but the angel of God speaks directly to Hagar. That subtle distinction. Sarna says it's not accidental.
No, he sees it as a profound theological choice by the narrator. It tells us something important about God's multi-layered interaction.
Okay, we'll unpack that for us.
God's act of hearing Ishmael is rooted in his covenant promise to Ishmael as Abraham's offspring. It shows his faithfulness to Abraham's entire lineage, not just Isaac's line. That's God's underlying motive, his commitment to his word, his hesed, his steadfast love.
Okay, that's the why. What about the how?
Right. The how is God's revelation and direct instruction being given to Hagar. She's the one capable of acting, the one in immediate need of comfort, guidance, and empowerment to save her son.
So it distinguishes God's motive, the promise to the child, from his method empowering the mother.
Beautifully put. It shows God's meticulous, compassionate care. He fulfills his promises while also strategically empowering the person who can act effectively in the midst of that despair. God knows who needs to hear what and how best to get things done in a crisis.
And the story concludes with Hagar getting an Egyptian wife for Ishmael. John Sailhamer sees this as more than just a cultural detail. He calls it a significant theological conclusion, almost a definitive stamp on Ishmael's future path.
Yes, Sailhamer argues that in Abraham's story, securing a spouse from the land, Canaan or his own people, Mesopotamia, like Isaac did in Genesis 24, was absolutely crucial.
For maintaining the purity of the covenant lineage, right?
Exactly. Preserving the promises, ensuring the line of blessing wasn't blurred. So Hagar's decision to find a wife from Egypt,
a land often symbolizing slavery, opposition to God's promise.
Precisely. It serves as a kind of theological period on Ishmael's separation. It symbolically severs his line from Abraham's covenant family in terms of bloodline, geography, and spiritual allegiance.
Further emphasizing Isaac's unique role as the sole heir of the promise.
Right. It highlights the divine necessity of this separation for the covenant to proceed through its intended channel, setting distinct national identities and destinies for both lines.
And finally, that image of God opening Hagar's eyes to see the well. So powerful, especially after her despair. Several scholars, Kenneth Matthews, Bruce Waltke, Klaus Westermann, John Walton, seem to agree on how to interpret this miracle.
Yes, there's strong consensus here. This wasn't likely a creation miracle where a new well just appeared.
It was not conjured out of nothing.
Probably not. Instead, it was an act of revelation. God opened her eyes to the well that was likely already there, hidden by her despair and panic.
Just out of sight or obscured by her fear.
Exactly. God restored her spiritual and rational capacity, enabling her to perceive the existing provision that was already within reach.
This reveals such a practical truth, doesn't it? In our deepest despair, God's provision isn't always some dramatic new thing.
Right. It's often the spiritual clarity to see the resources he's already given us, resources hidden by our fear and anxiety. It's a profound lesson about discerning God's existing grace and trusting his presence, even when things seem utterly dire. 3. Today's application. Core teachings for believers and pastors.
Wow. This ancient story, filled with so much human drama and divine intervention, it really holds timeless truths that resonate deeply today, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
So how can we, as believers, and especially as pastors, apply these core teachings to our own walk of faith, to our ministry practice? Let's turn our attention now to that enduring wisdom, how it shapes our understanding and guides our actions practically in our churches and communities.
Well, first, this passage starkly reveals the profound mystery of God's sovereignty working through human imperfections. Think about it. Sarah's request, driven by very human jealousy and fear, surprisingly gets divine approval. Why? Because in God's grand plan, it aligns with his larger purpose, advancing redemptive history through Isaac. Gerhard von Rad noted how God's will can manifest through human interactions that are deeply flawed, messy, sometimes hard for us to grasp or justify humanly.
That is challenging.
Yeah.
Especially for pastors, guiding congregations, counseling families. It means we can't always judge God's methods by our immediate sense of fairness or human perfection. So what's our responsibility then when we face situations that seem morally ambiguous, maybe painful, but seem to be within God's sovereign hand?
That's the crucial question. Our responsibility isn't to try and decipher God's secret will, or worse, try to justify our own flawed actions by claiming divine approval. No. Instead, look at Abraham's example. When God's will is clearly revealed as it was through his direct command to Abraham, our call is simply to obey, even when it hurts. Abraham's distress was real, deep anguish over sending his son away.
But he obeyed.
His ultimate choice was obedience to God's clear directive. This teaches us that true faith navigates emotional pain, navigates ethical dilemmas by choosing to trust and submit to God's revealed will, even when it's incredibly difficult. As John Sailhamer observed, God often uses human conflict, messy situations to advance his divine plan.
So for pastors, it's about guiding people towards obedience to God's known will, even when emotions are raging, pointing them to Abraham's tough obedience.
Exactly, that's the model, and the raw depiction of family strife here. Sarah's anger, Abraham's anguish, Hagar's despair. It's incredibly relatable, isn't it? It highlights the devastating impact of jealousy, fear, disputes over status or inheritance within a family or even within a church community.
Oh, absolutely. We see similar dynamics play out today, maybe over church leadership or finances or theological differences.
For sure. And when relationships reach that kind of deadlock, where emotions are high and solutions seem impossible, the temptation is to rely only on our own wisdom, right? Our logic, our emotions. Try to mediate, find a fair human solution.
What does Abraham's example teach us about navigating those deep conflicts, especially as leaders?
Well, the turning point in the story is undeniably God's direct intervention. Abraham, despite his intense personal pain, he opened himself to God's direction. And crucially, he ultimately chose to follow God's explicit command, not his own feelings or logic.
So the priority isn't just finding blame or seeking human solutions.
No. It teaches us that in dealing with these deep family or church conflicts, the priority is intentionally bringing all the pain, all the competing views, all the desperate pleas before God, actively seeking his transcendent wisdom and guidance.
So as pastors, we encourage people and model for them looking to this story, understanding God can use even messy, painful situations for his purposes.
If we invite his presence and guidance into the struggle, if we commit to his will above our own, it really underscores the need for divine wisdom, not just human cleverness, in conflict resolution. And Hagar's experience in the wilderness, not seeing the well until God opened her eyes. That's such a powerful metaphor for our lives. Gordon Wenham calls it the opening of spiritual insight, vital for us in ministry.
It resonates so deeply. Because often in our own distress, when our water runs out, our resources, our strength, our hope, we get blinded, don't we? By fear, anxiety, despair. We just can't see the solutions or resources that might already be around us, put there by God.
Exactly. It often feels like we lack vision more than we lack actual resources. Our spiritual eyes are just closed by the pain. And Kenneth Matthews points out, God's provision isn't always that dramatic new miracle. Often it's the opening of our spiritual eyes to discern the grace and resources he has already provided.
That's a crucial lesson for us and for those we shepherd.
Absolutely. As pastors, we need to teach our people. When you feel utterly spent, when the waters run out and despair is blinding you, the call isn't to deeper despair. It's to prayerfully ask the Lord, open my eyes.
Eyes of faith.
Eyes of faith, yes. To see the wells of his provision, his word, his spirit, his people, simple opportunities. His help is already there, often in unexpected forms, just waiting to be seen. Even in the wilderness, God has already provided for our thirst. Now, this painful family story also offers a difficult but maybe necessary lesson about boundaries. A painful separation was needed to protect the integrity of the covenant line through Isaac. Claus Westerman's work suggests that sometimes to uphold core beliefs, doctrinal purity, the church's mission, well, the church and individual believers have to establish clear boundaries.
Even if it causes relational pain or seems harsh. That's tough, especially in a culture that often prioritizes unity above everything.
It is tough. The impulse is often to keep everyone together, avoid friction. But setting boundaries doesn't mean heartless abandonment, does it? God's example here seems more nuanced, balancing truth and tenderness.
How so?
Because God, even while commanding the expulsion, simultaneously reaffirms his promise to Ishmael, make him a great nation, and grants him the blessing God was with him. Gordon Wenham calls this a compensatory blessing.
Ah, okay. There's a balance.
Yes.
Right.
It teaches us vital wisdom for ministry. While we uphold principles and set necessary boundaries for truth and mission, we must also continue to show prayerful care and compassion. We have to recognize God's sovereign plan and his expansive mercy, even for those outside our immediate circle.
God's mercy extends beyond our perceived community.
Right. His care reaches all humanity. We should humbly acknowledge his work beyond our own scope. We can be firm on truth, yet tender in heart, praying for and blessing those not in our immediate sphere. And finally, Paul's interpretation of Ishmael's mocking as persecution in Galatians 4. That gives us a crucial spiritual lens for today. It highlights this inherent ongoing tension of spiritual conflict.
Between what Paul calls being born of the flesh, relying on human effort, lineage, natural debility,
and those born of the Spirit, born of God's promise, grace, the Holy Spirit, a fundamental dynamic still playing out.
And this persecution isn't always obvious physical harm, is it? It can be subtle. Mockery of faith, contempt for spiritual values, casting doubt on God's promises.
Social exclusion, ridicule.
Exactly. It can be insidious. So how do we apply this discernment in our lives and ministries so we don't miss these subtle attacks?
That's the question.
As believers, as pastors, we have to be vigilant. Discerning this kind of spiritual attack, even when it's cloaked as mocking or innocent play or maybe modern enlightenment, when it's really undermining faith.
It can show up in families, workplaces, society.
Everywhere. And like Sarah, who decisively protected Isaac's spiritual inheritance from what she saw as a profound threat, we're called to firmly guard the precious truth of our salvation in Christ. We have to resist those subtle or overt pressures from the fleshly realm, the world's systems and values that seek to diminish the spiritual.
So being keenly aware of the spiritual battle, even in mundane forms. Yes. Standing firm in God's word and his promises. Protecting the spiritual heritage entrusted to us. 4. Summary.
Wow. What an incredible deep dive into Genesis 21. For me, really tracking the journey of Hagar and Ishmael, and especially God's faithful intervention right in their moment of utter despair. It just underscores that even in painful human decisions and family brokenness, amidst these seemingly final separations, God stays steadfastly committed to his promises, and he extends his compassionate care, his sovereign hand to everyone, even those seemingly outside the main line of blessing. He truly sees and hears.
And for me, this narrative powerfully illustrates that profound tension between divine election and universal compassion. God's sovereign plan, yes, it unfolds through chosen vessels, a specific lineage. Yet his heart of mercy, his providential care reaches far beyond that, sustaining and blessing even those not part of the primary covenant line. It reminds us our faith journey is deeply personal, often challenging, forces us to confront difficult truths. But it's always rooted in a God who truly sees, who hears, and who ultimately provides, even when we're blind to his provision. It's a story of both divine purpose and profound personal care. V. Faith reflection, pastoral angle.
So as pastors, as spiritual leaders, this story, painful separation, divine election, unexpected mercy, it really presents a profound, maybe even uncomfortable challenge to our understanding of God and how we do ministry.
Yeah.
How does it compel us then to perhaps reconsider or deepen our understanding of God's justice and his compassion, especially as we minister to those in our congregations who might feel outside, marginalized like the Ishmaels, or as we navigate deep family or community rifts in our own lives or churches?
That's such a critical, deeply relevant question for ministry today. It really hits the heart of our pastoral calling, doesn't it? This story forces us to hold these seemingly paradoxical truths in tension. God's particular sovereign election of Isaac for his redemptive plan, and simultaneously his universal tender care for Ishmael. It really challenges us to reflect deeply. How do we shepherd those in our flocks, in our communities, who for whatever reason, past hurts, perceived failures, identity struggles, might feel like Ishmael, excluded, overlooked, struggling outside the visible, promised blessings of the community? Are we maybe too quick to define insiders and outsiders based on our human ideas? Or do we, like God, humbly try to listen for the cries of all? Recognizing his hand at work, his grace extended, his purposes unfolding even beyond our immediate view, beyond our familiar structures. This narrative really pushes us urgently, I think, to preach a gospel that unflinchingly celebrates God's sovereign electing grace, while simultaneously embodying his expansive mercy and compassion in our actual pastoral care. It reminds us that ultimately, in Christ, God's redemptive embrace welcomes all who come to him by faith, regardless of their past wilderness experiences, their perceived status, or where they might have wandered from. It calls us to extend that same grace, that same vision, to be ministers of both divine truth and divine compassion.